As you know, you were not the first Guardians. Decades ago, there were 5 others. Cassidy, Hallinor, Yan-Lin, Cadma, and Nerissa.
They were chicken? Whoa, I am so glad we're witch.
Okay, so we've already established that the TV show and the comic are 2 alternate universes, and nowhere is that more evident than with Team Chicken. And really from that we get a tale of 2 chickens. The base lore of Chicken for both universes is that Nerissa was the keeper of the heart who started to go evil or use it for her own selfish means, and the Oracle takes the heart from her, gives it to Cassidy, and Nerissa basically murders her. And then the heart is given to Yan-Lin, at least in the comics. Every character of Chicken is different from their comic counterpart, even Nerissa, even though some of the differences are very subtle. Let's look at the comic first. Nerissa is continuously called by Yan-Lin and other members of Kandrakar an ancient threat, leading me to believe that the Guardians of Chicken had their group thousands of years ago. Nerissa was sentenced by Kandrakar to have her powers stripped of her and to be trapped within Mount Thanos, a place where all the elements merge. I'm not sure if she eventually was put into this mausoleum or casket, whatever you want to call this, immediately, or if she sort of naturally died. Nerissa looks mummified. Again, because it's likely been thousands of years, having been called an ancient threat. And the only way that Nerissa ends up emerging from this prison she's been put in was that the Oracle put a clause in her sentencing that said if all of the elements were to one day be in one being, she would be set free. Supposedly, nobody thought that would be a thing, which is also interesting because after Arc 2, they released a special called The Core of Kandrakar, where they talk about how the Guardians did not start as a group of 5 people, but actually one person, which then over generations spread into a pair, a trio, a quadruplet, and then what we've got now, 5 Guardians. So I guess they just never thought they would return to that. And yeah, it did come out later canonically, so I guess maybe they didn't think about that yet. That all ends up happening because Luba, the keeper of the Ormirs, did not like the Guardians and ended up doing something to get the powers to unite, create a changeling. It ends up in Cornelia. She brings Caleb to life and so forth. And Nerissa is then awakened. Nerissa has no connection to Caleb in the comics, aside from she ends up taking him in order to try to extract the elements from within him. In the comic, her motivations are very vague, which leaves it open to a lot of interpretation as to why she's doing what she's doing. All we know is that she thinks the Tower of Mists is hypocrisy, so she comes off looking as though she could have had some sort of valiant motivations. Comic Nerissa doesn't quite feel like too much of a giant threat. It's just more she's coming to get Kandrakar, and she has nightmare powers that she infiltrates the girls' dreams with nightmares, but from the most part, she's acting while being trapped or stuck still at Mount Thanos. She's emerged from whatever her mausoleum was, but she's still stuck there. And she doesn't leave there until she becomes young again, which she does by absorbing the energy of her minions and a little bit from Caleb. And they still exist after that, and they all storm Kandrakar together. And I feel like her defeat was just very swift. Like, she felt like a very quick thing that was resolved. And it just wasn't such a high-stakes story for me, which is why I prefer the show version of Arc 2. Cadma. She plays a big role in this arc because she is one of the only living Guardians left besides Nerissa. In both universes, she's very stubborn, but in the comic, it's because she's so fed up with Kandrakar, and in the show, it's because she's just a royal literally. Something quite interesting about Cadma is that she seems to have some kind of familiar, in other words, an animal sort of sidekick or protector, and his name is Sipu. He's either a raven or a crow. I'm going to go with calling it a raven, maybe even a jackdaw, which, funny enough, I feel like maybe Sipu has been around before. For example, in the beginning of Arc 2, there was a bird going after Caleb in his flower form, which if you aren't a comics reader, Caleb was turned into a flower at the end of Arc 1, and that was the whole reason that Cornelia ended up absorbing all the powers to bring Caleb back to life. This bird attacked the flower and maybe could have been acting on Cadma's wishes. And even funnier, in Arc 1, there's a point where when Cornelia's distracting Halen's dad, she has him point out the window and she's like, is that a crow over there? Tell me about it. So I wonder if he's just kind of always been watching. Because later on, Sipu leads Cornelia to Cadma, and I guess to me that kind of implies that the bird sometimes goes out and acts on his own because Cadma is surprised to see Cornelia and that she didn't summon her. So maybe Sipu would collect like some magical artifacts to give to Cadma in order to watch over them. As for Hallinor, we don't get to see much of her in the comics at all. Only a portrait and a picture of her when she's a younger guardian because she died. And since she wasn't allowed into Kandrakar, she's just dead. They believed that the Oracle knew what Nerissa would do because he's, supposedly all-knowing, simply just trying to point fingers at the Oracle. They have been banned from ever entering it. Kind of shady. If he wasn't guilty, why else would he go to such drastic response? I don't know. Something is weird about that. Both Cadma and Hallinor open up something called the Rising Star Foundation. So this whole Rising Star Foundation thing is seemingly done outside of Kandrakar's desires because Cadma and Hallinor seem to have kept in touch with Yanlin. Maybe she kept them in the loop about the new Guardians. And Hallinor specifically must have been really invested in Will turning out good and not leaving it up to chance like Kandrakar. Hence, Cadma saying Will was Hallinor's protege. And for clarification, the Rising Star Foundation was basically an orphanage and people were pretty much raised to stalk Will and I guess help her turn out a certain way. Basically, Cadma and Hallinor knew every little detail of Will's life. They made her swim instructors. They made people be her teachers. They somehow warped her entire life. That's kind of creepy and unsettling and really bothers Will when she first meets Cadma. And I'm really wondering, were any of them questioning why? It's so bizarre that, this orphanage you grew up at, raised you from possibly when they were for example, Will's swim teacher or something born before her was taken in, raised, trained in something, I don't know, somehow to become a swim teacher because Will would be into swimming, or maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of strange little holes in the Rising Star Foundation because everyone who was there was basically raised to then eventually track somebody. So I don't know how they explain that to the kids who eventually became adults that have to do this. Not dwelling too long on that because really there is no explanation. In this arc, Will is often referred to as prophesized, and it seems to me like no other Guardian Keeper has been prophesized before. Hallinor, at this point, has already been dead, but she kept a journal tracking the star that their other Guardian friend, Cassidy, turned into when Nerissa obliterated her. Cassidy, the reason why Nerissa was imprisoned, meant to be the second Keeper of the Heart in that group. The star that was tracked, she plays a large role in the story, even though her appearance is very short. We come to find out that Will was born under what they're calling Cassidy's star, and they also refer to it as her lucky star. And usually that just means the position of the celestial bodies when somebody was born. And it seems that when Cassidy died, she became a star because, as we know, she's not found in Kandrakar. She was supposedly wiped from existence by Nerissa and became a star. And I keep saying that over and over because that's the only explanation we get. That's it. And, Eric's father analyzed the diary and the girls were there and happened to be at the exact right time when Cassidy comes down. Eric's grandfather wasn't there to see it, so don't worry about that. But only Will could see Cassidy anyways. And she ends up talking to her, and Cassidy feels no bitterness toward the Oracle or Nerissa, and she just says that she played her role in destiny and that it was supposed to happen, and that Will was destined to be the greatest Keeper of the Heart of all. That's really all we ever hear about that prophecy business, and I really wish they kind of went more into that, but Cassidy ends up giving Will what she calls the spark of the heart, which is a little piece of the heart left behind in all keepers. I wonder if Nerissa still has hers or not. the heart had been taken from Will because Nerissa pretended to be Matt and was able to take it from Will willingly. So Cassidy gives her her essence to combat Nerissa and get the heart back. After Cadma turns over Halonor's diary, she wants nothing more to do with the Guardians. Halonor was the only one who wanted to track and do this stuff, so she basically washes her hands of them and says she wants nothing to do with them. Cadma and Halonor are popularly shipped because they essentially lived out their lives together, making this orphanage foundation. And that's really it. They basically lived together forever, and that's what that stems from. Lastly, we end up at Yan-Lin, Halen's grandmother, who was the last known keeper of the heart, technically, before Will. Possibly thousands of years of time passed. And Yan-Lin, as you know, is the only guardian of CHYKN to end up in Kandrakar, and that's because she did not stand with Cadma and Halonor when it came to believing the Oracle was more responsible than he says he was for what happened. As I've said before, she's a Kandrakar stan. She does begin to question things, though, when it comes to Halen's group, and advises her not to be so firm in her ways or beliefs, citing a old folklore that she knows about oaks and reeds, meaning the oak doesn't bend in a storm and eventually snaps, while the reeds bend and breeze and move whichever which way to survive the storm. I think that's really Yan-Lin regretting standing so firm with Kandrakar. Comic CHYKN is thousands of years ago. For example, Yan-Lin, every time she talks about Nerissa, calls Nerissa an ancient guardian, an ancient threat, and everyone talks about it's been a long time. It's been years and years, nearly centuries for some of them. And that's why I think it's been a long time. To explain that, there is the gift of the nymph Xinjing in the comics. The nymph that created the Heart of Kandrakar put an eternal gift in there, which is healing them when they transform, keeping them healthy, might even keep them younger longer. So, for instance, Cadma. She said she still has a little bit of a gift. She's got a green thumb. She's only got a little bit of gray in her hair. And after the whole thing with Nerissa, when we see her again at a later point, her hair is much grayer. And this is after she feels like her powers have been disappearing. So, therefore, I think she's beginning to age more rapidly. Yan-Lin, my theory for her and how she is so old is that I think she had to kickstart her aging process in order to have a family and eventually have Halen birthed at the right time to be a part of Will's guardians. With Will being prophesized, Yan-Lin knew exactly when Will was going to be born. She, I guess, maybe gave up her life essence to settle down and have a family. Not to spoil much, but there's an arc later on where Yan-Lin is mentioned as having had a nickname of the Bringer of Joy. And I think that was something she got as being the sole guardian at one point, because as we know, Cadma and Halonor stopped being guardians pretty much after Nerissa was imprisoned. So I think Yan-Lin acted as a single guardian for a long time to eventually have Halen down the line. Here in Arc 2, she talks about having to had been responsible for erasing Nerissa's mark, which is a mark she leaves on Will from touching her. And I feel like that mark leaves some sort of darkness or depression behind in the people that have it. And Yan-Lin was supposedly tasked with removing these marks, and she says that that darkness kind of lingers on and holds on. So I feel like Yan-Lin has been absorbing this darkness, this depression that Nerissa had left behind, and then that kind of earns her the nickname Bringer of Joy. But that's just me sort of pulling at strings here that I don't think were intentional, but I found them. Yan-Lin and Nerissa seem to have been the closest of the Guardians because people kept saying they were very close, they were very good friends. And Nerissa is actually able to obviously tell that Halen is what she calls Yan-Lin's heir of Guardian. It's never really established in the comic what element each of CHYKN has for the most part. Nerissa is the keeper of the heart. We know Yan-Lin is the heir guardian. Cadma is earth. But really, we never actually know what Halonor or Cassidy's elements are. And people often debate on if the show got it wrong and they were actually supposed to be switched, because Cassidy becoming a star makes sense for a fire guardian. But the name Halonor reminds me very much of like the word Helios or something, so it makes me think of the sun. So I guess that would make sense with her being the fire guardian. So I don't know about that one. So TV show CHYKN was 40 years ago. And we know that because that's when Nerissa says to Cassidy, it's been 40 years. And they age like normal. And honestly, also, there's no reason that Nerissa should look like this mummified version of herself, because show lore says that this was only like 40 or something, 50 something years before Will's Guardians. But also, there's that whole they fought Phobos business, so watch this Phobos theory to look into that one, because yikes. But here, there was a big difference for Nerissa. A portal somehow opened up in Mount Thanos, and she was able to enter Meridian and trained under the show-only character, Mage of Meridian, which eventually she, I guess, murdered and ended up having a kid, Caleb, with the leader of the Rebel Alliance, and everything just kind of spirals differently from there. And disguised as Trill, the nurse in the castle. So she was playing a long con here. Nerissa gets more chances to be clever. We get to see her manipulation in action. What's really cool about the CHYKN TV show lore is that Nerissa ends up sort of mind controlling each of the former Guardians and turning them young again. So it's kind of cool to see, old versus new group of Guardians that we didn't really get to see in the comics. Nerissa not only gets to have attacks in nightmares, but she also, even before she becomes the main show threat, unites a bunch of season 1 enemies to fight the girls before eventually coming out and trying to do things herself. And then after they turn young, she then is on their turf at school, sort of going at them in person. So TV show CHYKN is just so cool, and I love it so much. Nerissa kind of has this I want to rule and everyone be under me and I will create peace kind of thing. Cassidy here is a ghost that Nerissa then manipulates into wanting to be alive again. And we get to see Cassidy's mother, who is a blind woman, just kind of living along, and it seems like Nerissa has visited her a few times. Cassidy's shown as this sort of carefree jokester, a lot similar to Irma, and is also presented as a guardian of water. It's been rumored for quite a long time, and sort of confirmed by Greg, that he wanted to make Cassidy and Nerissa a couple. But, of course, that didn't pan out for apparently numerous reasons. Cadma, very, very different scenario here. She's the ruler of a planet of tree people and gets her own heart of the world, because the show introduced those hearts of the worlds. That's not a thing in the comics. And that's where Cadma, lives out her life in that planet, isolated from everybody. So she doesn't know what's going on or what's up, which is why she's easily manipulated later. At first, Cadma believes that the Guardians are evil, having been taken control of by Yan Lin, which goes to show you how out of touch Cadma is at that point. Cadma sort of gets to be a little bit of a mentor to Cornelia and shows her this green speaking ability where she can sort of speak to the plants or hear what the plants are saying in order to find something, which is actually something Cornelia did herself in Arc 2. Unfortunately, Cadma's holier than thou, I'm more powerful behavior is actually what is her downfall and gets her overtaken by Nerissa. Hallinor, though, is actually the first to go, and what's interesting here is Hallinor is in Kandrakar. One, because Yan Lin didn't die in the TV show universe, so they just put Hallinor in there because I really don't think they wanted to have Kandrakar look like the bad guys by having banned her for just disagreeing. Here we are, Hallinor in Kandrakar, who is a very fearful person. She is the former guardian of fire, and she thinks that the Guardians cannot handle the threat of Nerissa and ends up panicking and causing all of those powers to go into Cornelia when she tries to absorb them instead. And that's how that little plot point is changed. Just the simple fact of Hallinor having a panic attack is how Nerissa takes her down and absorbs her. Yan Lin is, of course, the last to fall. She is our great mentor of the witch girls in the show. Nerissa tries to offer her youth, and really nothing's getting through to her. Yan Lin is a Zen queen, and Nerissa ends up having to make a sort of a clone of her and just kind of trap Yan Lin for the time being in the Meridian medallion until later she can get her. Well, she ends up taking control of the clone, so it's kind of bizarre. So what's the fate of Team Chicken. Let's start with the TV show. Nerissa, she ends up trapped in the Jewel of Meridian for who knows how long. Don't know if they would have covered that in season 3 or beyond, if she ever would have come back. Cassidy, strangely enough, comes back to life and is the same age she was when she died, but I guess it's fine because her mother is blind, so she doesn't see that she's not aged at all, but that must be strange and weird to everyone else and will be really hard to explain to Heatherfield City Hall. Cadma just simply does not want to be a ruler of the tree planet anymore and wants to live a, quote, humble life. Yanlin now has a copy of herself pretending to be a twin sister named Mira. That probably could have set up some interesting hijinks for the upcoming seasons. And Hallinor, she was already dead, but is living in Kandrakar on the council still. Now, for comic Chicken, Will got the heart back because she said the heart doesn't answer to anybody but itself, so it went back to Will. Nerissa ends up absorbing Kor and Shagon's powers, or at least trying to. Shagon attacks her, that weakens her, somehow makes her old again, and then the girls just kind of zap her out of existence. Nerissa ends up dusted. Yanlin is dead and in Kandrakar, so she's basically the Hallinor of this world, except more involved, of course. Hallinor just is still a picture on a mantle. Cadma does return a little bit later, and it's involving Will's dad. She actually ends up paying him off to just walk away and never come back, because in the comic, Tom, Will's dad, is very much a criminal. He's threatening custody if he doesn't get the money he wants. In terms of outfit changes between the comics and the show, there's not too much difference. Just the fact that Nerissa goes from wearing the teal color as her main color to the purple color. And there's a couple differences with sleeves here and there, but and Cadma missing her sash, but really that's about it. They're, for the most part, they are translated 1-to-1. That's really all there is to the lore of Chicken, the interesting differences and dynamics, and I think that's all I'm going to say about that. See you for more 20th anniversary of the TV show celebrations. Bye.